So this is CNET 125. I wasn't able to have the first class live. I hope you people went here and watched the videos. If not, you can do that later. Every time I do a class, there are videos put up here. So I did an intro in the first part of chapter 1. I have videos from last time I taught the course, is how I started it. And the point is, someone already asked, are there hands-on projects? And there are not. All you do is there are quizzes. They're in the Canvas server, which you'll find up here. It's not the City College Canvas. It's my own server because I don't like the way they run the servers here. So we enroll here, and you'll find quizzes there to take. And there'll be discussions starting in a couple of weeks that you can get points for. And you'll do 2 presentations. So you should have a topic due on 9/15. You should choose a topic, just a few words, just a title. Any security topic is fine. And then the presentation is just a 4-minute presentation, is what they call a lightning talk. You can do it with slides or without. You can pre-record it as a YouTube video, or you can do it live over Zoom or physically come to class. Any of these are fine. Just have to explain some security concept, any type you like. And there's another one later, and each one of those is worth 50 points. It's quite a bit of your grade. So I used to assign papers, but now they're all written by ChatGPT, so they're all perfect. And no point doing that anymore, although, I mean, by the way, there's nothing wrong with using AI to write your stuff. Everyone's doing it. You should just learn how to use it well. And other real English teachers, they've got a problem, but I'm not going there. I'll just do the oral presentation instead. All right, and so that's how the class works. And so let me pick up at the second half of chapter 1 here. 125, chapter 1 is here. All right, and I want to get to, I think it's, up to security control frameworks. Okay. All right, so the first part of this is going to be up here. There we are, security control frameworks, right? The first part is basically security plus, the definition of security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and a few other things. Like I say, you can watch the video for that. That's up there. How will it be presented? Right, and I answered that, Connie, you probably heard. You can do it in person, or you can do it remotely over Zoom, or you can pre-record it on YouTube. Any of those are fine. All right, so, and I had students tell me, after taking my courses, that they wish they'd spent more time on these compliance frameworks. At first, they seem like a lot of data, sort of baffling and confusing, but in the real world, these things really matter. When you get to companies, my students, several of them are working as compliance officers now. It is a big part of security, and so there are all these crazy frameworks. They all do essentially the same thing, too. And you might as well get used to this. This is the way a lot of things are in tech. There are many, many ways to do pretty much the same thing. So the ISO 27000 series is extremely famous. This is an international standard. It is really big and complicated. I think you have to pay $100 to get the official documents that are thousands of pages. It typically takes companies years and millions of dollars to achieve ISO 27000 certification. But if you do, then you can have customers like military and federal government and huge companies. They require it. And this is part of why, when I was a kid, there was the Republicans would always complain about why the military pays $800 for a hammer. The point is, military equipment has to go through all these tests and compliances. It can't be just equal to the equipment you buy in the hardware store. Instead, a blizzard of paper has to go around showing it's been through security tests and other things. And that's what this thing is. So there's just a lot of documents here. These are the various documents, overviews of it. Code of practice for electronic discovery, that's forensics, and health organizations and evidence analysis and interpretation, many, many documents specifying how you do all sorts of security-related activities. That's the 27000 series. Now, the Zachman framework is one that wasn't even particularly oriented towards security. It was oriented towards IT. Now, if you go back to, say, the 1960s, businesses had business processes, but they didn't use computers very much. And when tech came in, everything changed. And every company is now using tech, and they began to understand all the problems you can have with your tech, and they tried to organize it. So here they add perspectives: executive, business management, architect, engineer, technician, and enterprise, to try to understand all the aspects of your company that are affected by technology and consider the various things that can go wrong. So it's just a way to organize your thinking. Then there's an open group architecture framework, and this one had 4 domains: technology, applications, data, and business, similar to the last one. And then the Department of Defense has their own framework for the U.S. military, and so it's got 8 views: all viewpoint, capability, data and information, operation, project, services, standards, and systems. These are different ways to look at your technology and how it interacts with you accomplishing your mission. And the British has their own version, which is pretty much the same. And you'll end up, there's the Sherwood Applied Business Architecture, yet another one. So in the contextual architecture, you have assets, motivation, process, people, location, and time. And then details here like business geography and inventory of buildings. And if you look at process, you've got process mapping framework, information flows, your applications and your systems and security mechanisms. And like I say, it's just sort of mind-boggling at first. And but these companies really do try to meet these things. And it's, as you can imagine, it is quite a chore to prove that you have aligned your company with one of these frameworks. You've established how you fit in all these various categories, what part of your company does each of these functions. And then there's COBIT. This is one that comes from ISACA. ISACA is a security-oriented group. I had students who are in ISACA. I think one of my ex-students is the head of the local ISACA chapter. They do a lot of training for CISSP and other certifications and a lot of other security things. There's a club in San Francisco. And so here's their the COBIT principles. They're meeting the needs of the stakeholder. A stakeholder is anybody who has an interest in seeing your company succeed. People who invested money, or people who use your products or need or partnered with your company, employees. These are all stakeholders. And then you cover the enterprise with an integrated framework. They have a holistic approach, and you're trying to separate governance from management. Management is controlling how things are done at the company so they get done, and governance is inspecting the processes to make sure they meet a certain standard. For example, a security standard. That's governance. So here's the principles in COBIT. You have principles, policies, and frameworks. That's the bureaucratic management side. And then you have processes, organizational structure. Culture, ethics, and behavior is really important. The number one reason why security initiatives fail at companies is because they don't fit into the culture. This is a huge problem. Most tech companies start as startups where they have half a dozen sort of teenage frat boys that form a culture where they're drunk on the job and everybody is searched into the server with a shared account of root, and they just write code and throw it around in a mess, and there isn't much quality control or anything, and they rush something out the door, like the first version of Facebook. And then as they get bigger and mature, then they actually have to get organized and stop being so sloppy. And that's hard to do. That's taking away their fun. So it's a common problem that your initiative is difficult to persuade them to move forward from their culture. Yeah, anyway. Then there's NIST. NIST is the government organization that sets standards, all kinds of standards, like how much a pound is, the Fahrenheit temperature scale, and all that jazz. And the 800 series is their information security series. And this one is the one I know best because I consult for critical infrastructure companies. And I learned right away, nobody wants my opinion on anything. If they ask me what to do about security, they want me to back it up with official government documents. That's what gives it authority. So I become basically I translate these standards into a form they can understand at the company. And that's what compliance officers do. And I say, I used to sneer at compliance when I was just a hot-headed pen tester, but now I've become more like management and I understand it. Compliance is pretty important. It's more boring, it's more tedious, it's more difficult, and that's how you defend a company, is by somehow lowering the number of stupid mistakes you're making, by having these audit trails and everything. So these are U.S. federal government policies. There are many, many SP 100 documents describing different pieces of these things, like the Internet of Things, which is probably the biggest risk for the biggest risk for home users has always been social engineering. The biggest risk to you is that somebody will just talk you into doing something stupid. This happens all the time. It's the number one fraud is romance fraud online. Somebody will convince you they're in love with you online and trick you into giving them your money. This happens all the time. People pretend they're too smart for that. Nobody is too smart for that. The only reason we're here is because all the previous generations had this powerful mating instinct. You can't turn it off. it makes you vulnerable. There's a thing to be aware of. That's the number one flaw. But anyway, another big one is the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things means you have all these devices in your home that are rather poorly made, all connected to your home network. Smart thermostats, smart refrigerators, smart light bulbs. Any of those is a possible doorway into your network. And there are standards here for it. So the Department of Defense audit, they now have defined what you should do to make something secure, and they've audited the Department of Defense, and they found that it's nowhere near compliance. They now know what they should do, but they haven't achieved it. The Department of Energy just got audited. I saw this link go by earlier today, and they found that last year they were audited, and they had something like 70 things they had to fix, and they've only fixed 30% of them, and they found another 80. So they're not only are they not meeting compliance, they're falling behind. This is true of almost all government agencies. The standards exist, but they don't have the training or the funds to actually implement them. So that's why people get hacked all the time. We are all very far behind where we should be in security. And that's why there's such a market for security professionals. So, and here's why there are so many of these things. This is the XKCD that explains it. There are 14 competing standards. And then people say this is ridiculous. We should develop one universal standard that covers all the use cases. So now there's 15 competing standards. This is what happens with image formats, movie formats, compliance frameworks. Somehow it's the natural state of things. When I started this business in 1974 or so, there was a big argument among us about which computer language would win. There were only like 3 or 4 at the time. There was COBOL, Snowball, Fortran, and BASIC. And we said one of these will win and all the others will go away, and we'll only use one language. And boy, that did not happen. There are hundreds of languages, and everybody that invents a new product, they invent a new language for some reason. Yeah?
What about Java and Pascal and Norton Commander, NC?
Norton Commander?
Yes. What about other languages?
Yeah, Norton Commander is not a language, it's just a framework. Framework you use to manipulate files. But the languages the code is written in is usually C++, C# or Java, but now there's many others like R and Rust, and there's just hundreds of them. I know a web developer that just shrinks his certifications down to 3x5 cards so he can fill a Rolodex with all his certifications. And typical website involves at least 10 different languages, which is kind of crazy, but that's where we are. Anyway, and so that's why there are so many frameworks. In a logical world, there would really only be 2 or 3, I think. But in fact, every little type of business has written their version of it. And by the way, all that noise is our primitive heating system. We have steam heat like from 1905. So anyway, so then there's high trust, CSF. This works with healthcare leaders and establishes a thing called the Common Security Framework, trying to meet the requirements of several regulations and standards. So in the CSF, it has 14 control categories, things like human resources, access control, compliance, asset management, physical security. By the way, the physical security, like locking the doors and having a guard on the gate, that's a real important part of security. Keeping the unauthorized people from getting into the room is part of the security. And there are many other things here. Business continuity is keeping your business running when there's a security incident, like a building burns down, you get hacked, you get ransomware. You need to have a plan to recover from that. That's business continuity. All right, and so there's critical security controls. These are the first 5 controls that eliminate most vulnerabilities. Inventory and control your hardware assets. This sounds easy, and it's not at all. You'll see in my incident response class, one of the projects, we used this product called Run Zero. H.D. Moore is one of the smartest people in cybersecurity, and he wrote the Metasploit framework, which is used by pen testers everywhere. And then he left and went to another company, and he just found out that when he does pen test at companies, there's some neglected computer or device that's out of date, vulnerable, and he gets in. Then when he comes back a year later, they still have that device. He realized most people do not know what they have. So he wrote a product called Run Zero that just scans your network to find all the devices and identify them, which apparently is a lot harder than you'd think. And anyway, this in itself is a big deal. Software assets, vulnerability management is checking to see if anything has a known vulnerability, checking the version numbers of your software to see if there's a later version, limiting who has administrative privileges. Like I said, low security companies have everybody sharing one account as root. You can't do that and meet any of these compliance frameworks. That's ridiculous. You have to have an audit trail that records who did what. Each person has to have their own identity. So if somebody does a bad thing, you can track it down. No shared accounts are allowed. And secure configuration for hardware and software. Just avoiding making obvious mistakes like default passwords and old versions of things goes a long, long way toward securing you. And a ransomware consultant I'm friends with says that this is always how ransomware gets in. It's never anything complicated. It's always a security 101 mistake, like just an open share, an old version of something, a default password, something incredibly simple is how they get in. All right. Then they have a lot of later ones, like analyzing your audit logs, malware protection, data recovery. These are good things. They have 20 controls that are good. But like I say, they're in order of importance. The first 5 are enough to stop most vulnerabilities. Anyway, then you got COSO, Treadway, another framework here. COBIT came from this. COSO is for corporate governance. So it's got control environment, risk assessment, control activities, and all this was interpreted not in terms of cybersecurity, but in terms of business risk. It's all existed before that. Your risk that somebody will, waste a lot of money on an advertising campaign that doesn't help your company, or they'll embezzle the money, this kind of thing. These risks have been around since before we had cybersecurity concerns. And then there's Octave, which came from Carnegie Mellon, and this implements small teams to address security needs. And looks like this. You establish drivers, risk management criteria, then you profile your assets, you identify threats, and then you identify and mitigate risks. They're all like this. You somehow list your assets you're trying to protect, you list the threats, which are bad things that could happen, and then you try to lower those risks down to an acceptable level. And no risk ever goes to zero. Like I mentioned, there's no such thing as perfect security. It's just a adjustment, balancing, judgment call. It always is. Then there's ITIL, another process management standard from the Office of Management and Budget in the U.S. government, who famously got hacked recently. Well, to a PC, not OMB. Anyway, then there's ITIL, has a security component with independent assessment of controls required every 3 years. And so the whole series of publications, service design and service portfolio management, business relationship management, and so on, which reminds me of third-party risk. Everybody contracts with other companies to do part of the work, and that's a risk. About 10 years ago, BART got hacked, but they didn't get hacked. What happened is BART had contracted with a third party to sell BART tickets, and they had information about the BART customers, and they got hacked. So even though BART's systems were not directly penetrated, one of their trusted partners was penetrated, and that's the problem with third-party risk. If you entrust somebody else to do something for you, you have to have a contract that specifies how secure they are. You might even have a right to audit them or scan them or something to see if they're not secure. This happened to Kaiser. About 15 years ago, Kaiser got an email from someone in Pakistan saying, "You owe me $20 or I'm going to dump your records on the web." And they said, "Why are our Kaiser medical records in Pakistan?" And they looked, and they were valid records. They had outsourced their data entry to a company who had then outsourced it to Pakistan without telling them, and then not paid the people in Pakistan. And so this is third-party risk. A lot of people do this. They do something sleazy and horrible, and you have to have a contract, and you have to test them, and then you can sue them or something. You have to consider that anybody you hire might be an idiot, and you can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. If you hire an idiot and they do something stupid, you're still liable. They say, "Well, why did you hire an idiot? Why didn't you monitor what they did? It's your fault." You can't just say, "They did it, it's not me." No, you're responsible for that data. If you hand it to somebody that does something stupid, it's still your fault. You might be able to sue them and get some of your money back, but the fact is, it's still your breach. You lost the data by handing it to an idiot who did the wrong thing with it. Anyway, then there's the Six Sigma. You hear a lot about this one. And so there's a loop here. There's a lot of these loop things. This is the kind of thing you have to define what you're trying to accomplish. You measure to see if you have accomplished it. Then you analyze to see what's causing the discrepancy between those two things. Then you improve your processes, implement controls to have the improved process, and you just keep going around this loop, continuously improving. All security programs have to have this cyclical pattern because the world is constantly changing. There's always new threats. You always have new devices, new customers, new locations. your company is constantly changing, so you can't just stay still. You have to keep running just to keep up with the changes. And so that's the loop, the Six Sigma loop. And then there's the capability maturity model. This is really quite helpful. This has helped me a lot in trying to help small businesses I give talks to. Nobody can move from no security at all to something like one of these compliance standards overnight. You have to go in steps. So first you have no security at all, then you have basic security where you had some control of the risks, then you start having continuous management, then you start having an instant response team or something. These are all levels of maturity of your capabilities. So you have initial is where you just get the work done at all. Managed is where you actually measure how well you're doing the work and control that. You have reports, Then you define it quantitatively managed, and like I say, the optimum is optimized, where you have continuous improvement. You state your goals, you implement controls to try to achieve the goals, you measure what's really happening, and then you improve your system. So you're constantly going around a loop, improving it. That's the best. And it typically takes years to move up these levels from a company. So here's a United Kingdom's risk analysis and management method called CRAM, where you identify your assets, identify the threats, and then identify and prioritize countermeasures, and they all do these things one way or another. And so here's another one, an XKCD that was pretty good. Airplane safety is actually quite safe, they say, and elevators are quite safe. There's controls when they fall, but if you ask software engineers about voting, they'll say it's terrifying. And the easiest way to explain this is our entire field is bad at what we do. If you rely on us, everyone will die. But this is the case. The reason we have so many security engineers is computer security is terrible. Everybody gets hacked. Like I just said, the Department of Energy, a critical infrastructure, is just falling behind their own goals. They're just falling further behind every year. This is the way almost everybody is. So there's no solved problem. There's nothing you can buy that will make your company secure. There ought to be like an AI firewall or something. If you pay $1 million, now you're safe. But there's nothing like that. Instead, there's gadgets and software and teams of highly educated humans trying to protect you and not succeeding in a lot of cases. Even after that, Google gets hacked, the federal government gets hacked, everybody gets hacked. It's a crazy world out there, but it's job security for us. Because we're all pretty ineffective, but nobody knows anything better than hiring more of us. It's just like when there's a crime wave, you hire more cops. Even though there's still a crime wave, they're not really stopping it, but you imagine if you get enough of them, eventually they'll hold it down. That's the same thing we're doing. Anyway, and so something I mentioned that's real important, you'll see this a lot in the CISSP training. If you want to initiate a security program at your company, you cannot do it from the bottom. This is the number one mistake people make. Some new security guy comes in, they have some training from college or something, they go to the company and they say, hey, you're using like unencrypted authentication. You're not running on the right patches. They find a security problem. And then they try to get people to care and nobody cares. And they get all disgruntled and angry and try to change it from the bottom. You'll just exhaust yourself and accomplish nothing. What you must do is you must convince a top-level manager to believe you. And they have to put their weight behind it, because in order to make any change, you have to allocate resources. That's going to cost money. You need somebody at the C level who can actually spend money. If you're at the bottom and you have a smart idea, you can't do anything unless you can convince somebody at the top. And that's the purpose of this course and this certification. You learn how to communicate with management. Understand management. Most technical people think managers are just idiots in their way. I used to. And then when you gradually become a manager, you understand what they're doing. And it's like the person driving the ship. You might be down with a wrench fixing the engines, and that's important. But the captain does not want to hear the details of what you did on the engine. They just want to know, is it working? Do I have to fix something? So they want to know, what problem do you have? What will happen if I don't fix it? How much will it cost and how long will it take to fix it? That's the kind of thing they need. They don't want every detail. And I didn't understand that when I was a technician working at a company, but I eventually figured it out. And that's what they're talking about here. So if you have a security plan, you have to convince somebody in high-level management to be your champion, or it's not going to happen, and don't waste your time. Anyway, so let's try a Kahoot. Let me bring these up. This is 1D, so I have to log in. Oh, let's look here for, how will we be presenting? That's fine. A supply chain attack. I didn't see, yeah, I saw people answering questions up there, that's good. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to as a supply chain attack, but yes, like for example, that's an example, I suppose, of third-party risk. You trust stuff you get from somebody else, and that might be what gets you. Let's see if I can sort, if that would do any good. Aha, it did work. And I want 1D, right? Yeah, 1D, there we go. All right. There, so take some device and go to kahoot.it with that number and any name, and you get extra credit if you're in the top 3 of these. So it can add up, but mostly it just stops people from falling asleep during a lecture. We got a pretty good class now. We got like 8 people in the room and 12 online. Good. My Saturday class, only about 4 people showed up, although there's supposed to be 25. I don't know what's up with that. But this one, a lot of people showed up, so. Yeah, what's up? Go to kahoot.it. Yeah. Yeah, then you put in this number.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go there.
This one?
Kahoot.it, I think it's the first one there.
Here?
Yeah. Yeah, and then you put in this number and a name.
Okay.
Yeah, good, good. Yeah, that's right. Then you'll show up here. That's right. And it creates a random face for you. And some of the students learn how to put like emoticons in their name and stuff. And if you use a fake name, by the way, and you win, you'll have to tell me your real name if you want your points. Anyway, but however, a lot of students are in the habit of using fake names on the internet all the time, and that's a very good habit. Anytime you're on the internet, lie to everybody. Unless they're paying you money, nobody has any business knowing anything true about you, and they'll only use it against you. So you have to overcome all instincts of honesty on the internet. Especially these days. Everybody's just profiling you, and not to benefit you in any way. Well, I think maybe anybody still coming in? I don't know why people started dumping the real name on the internet after Facebook got popular. That's right. My video is blocking. Oh, no, it's not. The pin is not blocked by my video. It's only 6 digits, 864051. But I'm glad you warned me. Sometimes my face is blocking it, but not today. All right, so let's go. All right, so which framework comes from the international organization? Oh, QR code. Okay, I didn't know there was one. Anyway, that's it, ISO 27000. That's the big international one. All right. All right, which framework comes from ISACA? That's COBIT, comes from ISACA. All right. All right, which framework comes from the U.S. federal government? Probably the most important for a lot of us in America. Certainly if you deal with government or critical infrastructure companies in America, which is what I do. That's NIST, National Institute of Standards. Good. All right, which framework is mainly used in healthcare? that's the CSF. Good? All right. So, should have a place to put these. I think we know who CCSF rules is from a previous semester. Lola, 22. I don't know who that is. They'll have to tell me their real names, don't their points. Sophia is a real name, so that's good. All right, so let's carry on here. All right, so you have a security program life cycle. Your security program has a loop, like I said. You plan and organize a risk assessment, what you're trying to do, how you're going to improve security. Then you implement it with controls. You put in things like two-factor authentication and firewalls and antivirus and stuff. Then you maintain it, operate and maintain it, performing audits and updating things. And then you monitor and evaluate to decide how well it's working, to see how many security problems are still happening despite your controls, because nothing is ever perfect. And you go around this loop forever for an optimizing company. After you evaluate, then you make a new plan, how you're going to improve it to deal with whatever is not working, and keep going around. All right, and then there's the issue of compliance. So compliance is you align with a defined standard. Those other things were frameworks to help your thinking. Compliance is sort of the measurement part. So it's typically industry specific. PCI is extremely famous. If you listen to Paul's Security Weekly, which I'm on almost every week, there's a PCI guy that's almost always there. Almost every day PCI comes up. Anybody that takes credit cards has to meet the PCI compliance, and they keep updating it, and it's a big deal for companies. You can't do any kind of financial work pretty much unless you get PCI compliance. And it specifies that you have to encrypt the data, and if you take a lot of credit card numbers, you have to be audited by a particular auditor every year, and so on. Then there's HIPAA for healthcare. If you are a health insurance company and handle a lot of patient data, you must meet certain requirements of how you handle healthcare data. And so governance, risk, and compliance is the name of this field. Governance looks at strategic planning. Then you have risk, determines what your risks are, doing a risk analysis, what bad thing could happen, and compliance addresses your adherence to these rules. And your company will advertise, we are compliant with this standard, and in your business relationships, they will expect you to be compliant with that standard, and you have to maintain it and be able to prove that you're compliant, and that usually means a lot of audits and a lot of paperwork, proving that everything has been tested and you have demonstrated that you are in fact compliant. All right, so laws vary. A lot of industries are regulated and have their own special legal requirements. And privacy is a big issue these days, for how you're going to handle the personally identifiable information of your customers and your employees and such. This is the main, most common data breach is that somehow they got to the customer's credit card numbers or addresses or phone numbers or something. The European standard is the only privacy law that has a lot of teeth. America has not passed hardly any cybersecurity laws at all because our government's been pretty paralyzed for 10 years. We're pretty much divided, so we can't agree on hardly anything. So Congress does essentially nothing. They can't really agree on passing any rules about pretty much anything. But Europe has. So Europe is setting the standard for privacy and internet security. And most companies do upgrade to meet the European standards, and then some of those features are also available in the American version. So like Facebook set aside a $3 billion profit for a possible FTC privacy fine, that sort of thing. They did get fined a few times with various laws. Facebook, a few years ago, had a master database with all the data about everyone, and the password for it was happiness. And they were actually sued, saying that is ridiculous, that is not secure enough. And I think they had to pay a fine for that. Yeah. And so then there's, so your computer could be a target, or it could be used as a tool to steal data. And in general, one problem with computer crime is because of the internet, the attack could come from anywhere, and it's very hard to decide who attacked you. Even if the attack appears to be coming from America, it might be somebody outside America controlling that server. They call that attribution, and that's very difficult to say who actually did it. So civil law is laws that usually do not carry a prison sentence. They mean that somebody will have to pay money. This is lawsuits. Common law is used in all these countries. This is the major legal system in the CISSP exam because they're determined by precedents. Because, as I said, there are no actual cybersecurity laws in America, really. Haven't been able to pass any. So what there are is precedents from previous cases. A company got sued and they had to pay a fine. Therefore, if you do the same thing, you'll probably have to pay a fine too, by comparison with that case. That's why just following the precedents of previous cases is what determines. That's why whenever a new law passes, they always say, well, we don't really know what it means until somebody goes to court and there's a decision, and then there'll be a precedent, and then we know what it means. And of course, in other countries, they have religious law, although not here, although we're not too far from it, actually, lately, especially on issues like abortion and stuff. But anyway, and then, of course, there's customs practiced and treated as laws. So criminal and civil law, like I say, criminal is something where you have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt and you usually end up going to jail. This is things like murder. Civil law is by far the most common risk at a company. You're usually not doing crimes per se. What's happening is you have offenses, like you rip off customers, like Wells Fargo was creating customer accounts and charging them fees for services they didn't want. Phone companies do this all the time. They call it slamming and cramming, turning on services you don't want and charging you for it. And when they get sued for that, they have to give people some money back. Nobody goes to jail. But anyway, and it's much easier to prove. All you need to prove is like 51%, more likely than not, as opposed to here where it has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. All right, and so statutory damages are those prescribed by law which come just from the fact that you broke the law. Compensatory damages refund money that you shouldn't have taken, and punitive damages are extra amounts of money just to make you not do it again and to scare other companies into not doing this bad thing. This happened to Trump in New York City. He got hit with $500 million of punitive damages, and they just turned it off, having to do with him lying about how much his property was worth in real estate in New York City. Anyway, then there's regulatory law, which is a big deal, like I say, where there's a regulation covering your industry that says you must meet this standard. Those laws we do have. And so if you're handling medical data of a certain quantity, you have to abide by HIPAA and so on. Here's a general feature of all law, which is why I've often opposed many initiatives to pass new laws. I feel like this covers a lot of things, like AI. It's just liability. If you make any kind of product, like a cookie, and it turns out that it hurts people, they can sue, saying, you should have known that you shouldn't have put poison in the cookies. And so that's called the duty of care, a prudent man rule. You should do what a prudent person would do. And due diligence is the management of due care. So you make sure that people are not just doing ridiculous, stupid things. One of the lawsuits, I used to be a database analyst at a company that refunded money to people after crimes. In one of our lawsuits, this company decided to hire convicts in prison in Los Angeles to do data entry for them. And they were doing data entry of financial data and credit card transactions. So they found out who was rich. They told their buddies on the outside, who started robbing those people, and eventually they killed somebody. And then they came down and said, what did you do? You hired who? To do what? And, saying anybody with any sense would have seen that this is a bad thing to do.
Yes, wrong way.
Yes, this is the prudent man rule. Wait a minute, this is ridiculous. Anybody should have seen that this was going to lead to trouble. This happens a lot. People do things, and when an objective, clear-headed person looks at it, they say, you must be an idiot to do this. Anyway, there's trademarks, of course, patents and copyrights. We know all about this from people downloading movies and books and everything on the internet. That's intellectual property law. And there's software piracy is the most common attack. This, by the way, is one of the most common crimes in America. I think the only thing that happens more often than software piracy is exceeding the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Those are the two most common crimes in America. Anyway, so then there's digital right management, trying to limit who can copy things and punish them if they do make unauthorized copies. And then, of course, export restrictions. We had a lot of export restrictions in the 90s of cryptography, so they had to have a special version of Windows XP with inferior cryptography. It was sent to nations we didn't like, which turned out to be a really bad idea because it poisoned the internet with machines that use weak cryptography, and all the servers have to accommodate that. So a lot of improperly encrypted stuff going around. And when I went to China for DEF CON China, I wanted to teach a course on cryptography, and they told me, no, you can't do that. They said the Chinese will like it, but the Americans will get mad when you come back. And I found out that's true. There's a thing called the entity list. And cryptography cannot be exported to people on list D or E, like Russia and China is on the D or E category because of all the software piracy that goes on there. They think I can't go teach cryptography there, so I didn't do it. I taught exploit development, which in a logical world might be considered a worse thing, but anyway, that was legal. They were very good at it too. Anyway, so here's the group. Yeah, Group D is here. China's in Group D, and so is Russia. Pretty strict. All right, so you have data breach is when the confidential information you collected is exposed. Cybercrime is any criminal activity. Going dark is what law enforcement always complains about, that all the encryption means there's more and more evidence they can't find. But of course, there's also more and more evidence they can find as people use Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and everything and put their whole life on there. So the privacy people say, yeah, don't try to unencrypt my chat messages. Instead, you still have plenty of evidence for everything. But anyway, that's the battle. And so privacy, there's a European Privacy Directive. And so there are some privacy guidelines out there specifying individuals be allowed to do this. You have a right to be forgotten, so on in Europe. There's Safe Harbor is one of the early attempts. There's a huge problem. European companies really want to use American services like Gmail and Yahoo and Amazon and stuff like that, but they have no privacy here. Europeans that put their data here have no protection, and that violates European privacy law. So the more strict people in Europe have always been trying to form a consortium to make an independent imitation of these services that has gone nowhere. So instead, they just keep coming up with temporary legal frameworks where they can pretend there's not enough risk when there totally is. So Safe Harbor was one of them. But when Snowden came out, that ruined Safe Harbor. He revealed what the NSA was stealing all the data, and that scared them. So they made a new thing called Privacy Shield, and I think that ended. Now they have another one. They're all just legal papering over the fact that Europeans' data is totally exposed to the government over here, and they come up with ways to sort of pretend that's not true because they need to use these services. And this is always the case with all security things. There's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Your company will always have to do less safe things in order to get the job done. That's availability. You have to get the job done even if it involves some risk. That's why you hire security professionals to try to protect us, because you have to take some risk just to get the job done. All right, and so there's a Council of European Convention on Cybercrime, and when I went to the last High-Tech Crime Investigators Association, which is the Secret Service, they were talking about how international cooperation on cybercrime is actually pretty good, better than it used to be. That's why you see often in the news they break up international rings doing things like phishing and ransomware. Right. So there's a lot of laws out there. HIPAA is the one to handle health insurance information, limiting how it can be handled and encrypted and such. CFAA is the one where most hackers are prosecuted for. This is protects government and financial computers. It's a crime to do anything on a server that exceeds your authorization. And that's pretty vague, and turns out this is what most hackers are charged with, CFAA violation. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act protected these from warrantless wiretapping, but the Patriot Act, after 9/11, greatly removed most privacy protections in America, so the government can pretty much get their hands on anything, and it keeps on being renewed, the Patriot Act. Gramm-Leach-Bailey forces financial institutions to protect their information. Sarbanes-Oxley was a response to Enron, which again causes financial information to be recorded because the Enron accountant just deleted all the data. And PCI is self-regulation of credit card data by people who handle credit card numbers. And if you do have a breach, then you are required to notify people. I don't think there's a federal law yet, but there's a lot of state laws. And so then there's, of course, professional ethics is another thing you have to do for the CISSP. There's one reason why people like you to have a CISSP. If you have one, you can lose it if there's a breach. It's like having a law license or a medical license. So here's the Code of Ethics, the 4 canons: protect society, act honorably and honestly, provide diligent and competent service, and advance and protect the profession. So you have to spend some time donating your time, bringing up others one way or another, teaching classes or giving talks at conferences. You have to not pretend you know things you don't know, only provide services that you're competent at, and so on. And this is not all that different than anybody else, like a contractor building a roof should obey these kind of things. I had an ethics complaint against me. There's a lunatic online who makes trouble for everybody called Attrition, and he decided to go after me and made a bogus complaint against me that I claimed to be the security officer of the college, which I had not. And so he sent this to me, made an accusation, and it was canceled and fund the finding. You do have to respond, though, within 30 days. Anybody can complain, even if they're not your customer or anything, and you have to respond within 30 days. And then the board of the ISC² will rule on your case. And they didn't take away my shirt. Anyway, but it's a thing that can happen, and that's part of why it's valuable. If you really did something bad, perhaps they would take away your shirt. Although in practice, it doesn't seem to work too well, but in theory, it's there. Anyway, here's another Kahoot. Let's see, questions up here. How deep does the CISSP go into the frameworks? Very high level. The whole CISSP is a mile wide and an inch deep. All you need to do is recognize like a few words and choose them off a list. You don't go very deep into detail of anything. And in China, I taught in Beijing. DEF CON China happened twice, both times in Beijing. And then I don't think it'll ever happen again. Then the pandemic hit, and now relations between us and China are very bad. So I don't think there'll be another DEF CON China anytime soon. I'm glad I got to go. I had some Indian students at my DEF CON training, and they told me there are no security conferences at all in India. And wow, seems to me like Black Hat Delhi would be a chance to print money. These guys flew 28 hours to take these courses. If there was one inside India, I'm sure a bunch of people would go. I think there's an opportunity there for somebody, but they don't have any security conferences inside India. It's ridiculous. There's a ton of tech people in India. I'm sure people would like to have one. Maybe there's some law against it or something. I don't know. But it's pretty crazy. They have to fly all the way to America to get training. Especially in the current climate, which is pretty hostile for foreigners coming into America. So, what's that? Well, I don't really know. I would assume they have some government organization like NIST and all that, but I don't know, maybe they don't. I know there's a lot of incredibly insecure stuff going on in India. I give talks about some of the flaws in their stuff. So maybe they're just way behind on cyber. But I think somebody could start a conference and make some money. Anyway. All right, so what's the new European law? It's not all that new anymore. I guess it's getting to be about 5 years old. That's the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. All right. And which laws are enforced by police? Those are the criminal laws, of course. We all know that from TV cop shows. All the rest of them are just matters of lawsuits, not cops. All right. Which law protects movies and music? That's DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. All right. And which law ensures financial disclosure? Sabinus Oxley. All right. So, all right. Record the winners. Okay, 3 for JW. They'll have to tell me who they are. And Lola wins again. And Brandon. Okay. All right. Well, it's about 7. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we should be able to finish up this chapter. Let me close this and stop the video.